From failure to recognition, how I transformed pain into inner strength. I never imagined an invitation could affect me so much. When I received Pedro's message inviting me to his wedding, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope to rebuild a bond that had been destroyed by arguments and resentment. It was an opportunity, I thought, to finally show that time doesn't erase the good in us, that I could still be part of my own family without fear or shame. For 6 years, I distanced myself from everyone, creating an invisible but firm wall between us. And in that moment, I felt like maybe I could tear it down, even if only for a few hours. I wanted them to see me differently, to understand that my life wasn't defined by the standards they'd always tried to impose on me. My name is Nikolai, and all of this happened about 3 years ago, when I was 28. At the time, I was trying to rebuild my professional and emotional life. Working as a freelance designer, I felt like I was finally finding my place, even if in my family's eyes it felt like a failure. Before this invitation, my life was a delicate balance between the feeling of being on the right path and the constant pressure of not being good enough. Every ignored message from my mother or every ironic comment from my brother was a painful reminder that, for a long time, I felt unappreciated within my own home. I had learned to cope with the lack of approval, but I still missed recognition. That simple, proud of you, that never came. Before the wedding, my days were a mixture of fear and self-doubt. I avoided family gatherings, text messages, even seemingly innocent phone calls. Every attempt at closeness ended in conflict or contempt, and this drained me emotionally. At the same time, I struggled with feelings of inferiority, trying not to compare my life to Pedro's, who had always been the brilliant one, my parents' favorite. I felt like I somehow needed to prove my worth, not to them, but to myself, even though external pressure made this process painful and confusing. It was a cycle of self-deprecation and resistance that seemed endless, until the invitation arrived and awakened something I thought I had lost: courage. In the days leading up to the wedding, I revisited painful memories and moments of frustration that I still harbored. Every childhood memory, every veiled criticism, and every mockery mingled with the nervousness of knowing I would be in front of them again. But something inside me had changed in recent years. I had learned to value my quiet achievements, my effort, and my emotional independence. I felt that no matter what happened that day, I could no longer allow myself to be diminished or manipulated. This thought gave me a quiet strength, a determination I had never experienced before, something that transformed fear into motivation. On the wedding day, everything seemed normal at first glance. The impeccable decor, the elegant clothes, Pedro's feigned smile. But I already knew the event wouldn't just be a celebration. It would be a stage for revelations and confrontations I'd been mentally rehearsing for years. Upon arriving, I tried to remain calm, to smile politely, but every glance from my family carried the weight of judgment. The feeling of being watched and compared once again heightened my anxiety. Yet at the same time, a spark of determination began to grow within me. I knew that in that moment, something had to change, that this might be the last time I would allow them to dictate my worth. As soon as I entered the room, I noticed curious glances and veiled whispers. It wasn't long before my parents began their subtle taunts, ones that seemed innocent to those unfamiliar with our history, but carried the full weight of the humiliation accumulated over the years. My heart raced, and for a moment, I felt like running away. But then I looked at Pedro, smiling at everyone, trying to hide an insecurity I already knew all too well, and something inside me flared. I wouldn't be silenced. Each disparaging comment about my lack of success only increased the urgency to respond, to show that I finally had the voice and courage to confront what had always hurt me. When my parents began comparing my life to Pedro's in front of everyone, something clicked inside me. For years, I'd swallowed hurt, chills, and sleepless nights, trying to prove my worth in silent ways. But there, in the middle of a celebration, that should have been joyful, I felt it was time to break the silence. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice firm and clear, charged with emotion. I spoke about every moment of manipulation, about the favoritism that eroded my self-esteem, about how I'd felt invisible and devalued for years. Each word was heavy, each sentence ripped from painful memories, but it was my truth, and nothing could silence it. Initially, there was complete shock. Whispers turned into audible murmurs, looks of disapproval mixed with surprise, and gradually, everyone fell silent. I realized the impact of my words was beyond what I had imagined. My brother, who had always portrayed himself as the successful one, began to tremble slightly. My words had touched a nerve I hadn't even known existed, and it was at that moment that I began to realize that my breakthrough lay not only in defending myself, but in revealing the hidden truth, in exposing what had always been hidden by appearances. The feeling was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. Tensions reached a fever pitch when I began revealing details no one expected. That Pedro wasn't the successful, self-employed businessman everyone believed, but that he actually depended on the work and support of his wife, Sophia. Disbelief filled the room, and my parents tried to interrupt, trying to minimize what I was saying. But the truth was finally there, impossible to ignore. I felt an intense mixture of fear and relief. Fear of the consequences, but relief at finally no longer bearing the silence, at no longer submitting to lies and humiliation. Each word released a bit of the pain I'd carried for years. Sophia, who until then seemed like a silent guest, began to understand the situation. Her expression changed, revealing a mixture of surprise and indignation. The reality I had just exposed also impacted the image my brother had constructed. In that instant, I realized that my confrontation wasn't just about me. It was about justice, about honesty, about breaking a toxic cycle that existed within our family. For the first time, I felt my voice had power, that my words could create real change, even if painful. Adrenaline coursed through my body, but the feeling of empowerment and clarity overcame any residual fear that might still exist. The atmosphere in the room changed completely. The murmur of the guests turned to absolute silence, broken only by the sound of my own rapid breathing. I saw a mixture of shock, curiosity, and judgment in their eyes, but for the first time, I didn't care. My focus was on myself, on not allowing my emotions to be manipulated or devalued once again. Every word spoken in that moment carried years of accumulated pain, but also strength and determination. I felt my heart pounding, as if each beat were a reminder that I had finally regained control over my own life. Pedro tried to react, trying to minimize the situation, but his gaze betrayed fear and frustration. He realized he could no longer maintain the perfect image he had so painstakingly constructed. I, on the other hand, felt a freedom I hadn't known in a long time. Every sentence that came out of my mouth was a step toward my own emotional liberation. My body was tense, but my mind was clear. I had decided that I would not let anyone diminish my trajectory, and that my voice would finally be heard, not just as a defense, but as an affirmation of who I truly was. My parents were visibly disconcerted. The authority they'd always believed they held over me seemed to crumble in the face of the reality I was exposing. They tried to interrupt, to plead for calm, but the cycle of humiliation finally broke. I felt a strange mixture of relief and guilt. Relief at finally speaking out, and guilt at knowing I'd hurt those I still loved, even indirectly. But I realized that self-love, self-esteem, must come first, even if it causes temporary discomfort. I was learning then and there that true overcoming requires the courage to face not only others, but also one's own accumulated pain. Sophia finally spoke. Her voice was firm, filled with understanding and indignation. She questioned Pedro, exposing the lies and the dependence he had tried to hide. The sense of justice I felt in that moment was overwhelming. I realized my role was not only to confront, but also to help reveal the truth that had been masked by years of appearances. Emotions were mixed. Happiness at seeing the truth emerge, sadness at realizing how subtle and destructive manipulation could be, and relief at finally feeling that my words had resonated beyond my own perception. It was at that moment that something inside me completely shifted. I was no longer the insecure person who had arrived at the salon, fearing every look and every comment. The experience of being authentically present, of confronting those who had always belittled me, brought a clarity I never imagined I could achieve. I realized that true strength lies not in defeating others, but in respecting yourself, valuing each personal achievement, and not allowing the past to dictate who we are in the present. It was a giant step toward my own emotional transformation and toward building a more authentic and confident life. The tension rose as Sophia stood up, interrupting any attempt at Pedro's defense. She looked directly at him, and in that moment, I realized something important was about to happen. Her outrage wasn't just for me, but for the manipulation she herself had suffered, years of a narrative constructed by her husband. I felt a mixture of fear and anticipation, but also a surge of hope. It was as if justice had finally found a way to manifest itself, and that my courage, my voice, had been the trigger for the truth to come out. Pedro tried to argue, but every word he said felt empty, fragile, and powerless. He had built a facade of success, but now it was exposed. Each disapproving look from Sofia was like a reflection of what my parents couldn't see. The false glow he displayed on the outside hid insecurity and dependence. I, on the other hand, felt light, despite the chaos. For the first time in a long time, I realized that my words had power, that my courage could create real change not only in my life, but also in the dynamics of those around me. When Sofia decided, right then and there, that she would not continue with the marriage, I felt a strange mixture of triumph and relief. It wasn't just a personal victory, but an exposure of the truth that had been silenced for years. I saw my brother, who had always been held up as a model of success, crumble before everyone, not out of anger, but because his lies were revealed and his dependency exposed. And I, who for years had been the shadow, the forgotten one, the failure according to them, finally felt my worth recognized, not by others' approval, but by having stood up and spoken the truth. The feeling that washed over me in that moment was one of liberation. Every tear I'd tried to hold back, every repressed feeling, now seemed transformed into strength. I realized I no longer needed their recognition to feel complete. My life, my choices, my silent achievements had value in their own right, independent of comparisons or judgments. It was a hard, painful, but absolutely necessary lesson. For the first time, I felt that my past, with all its accumulated pain, no longer defined my present, and that I could move forward without fear of being diminished. After Sofia's shock and decision, the atmosphere in the room changed completely. There was no longer humiliation, only a heavy silence, followed by curiosity and amazement. My still racing heart now beat with a different rhythm. No longer fear or insecurity, but a sense of inner triumph. I realized that by facing my family and exposing the truth, I had achieved something greater than any external recognition, my self-esteem and my emotional freedom. It was the first real step toward the life I wanted to live, a life where my words and my choices mattered, not the unrealistic expectations of others. In the days following the wedding, I was still processing everything that had happened. The feeling of empowerment and liberation remained, but now accompanied by a deep reflection on my own journey. I realized that overcoming grief wasn't just about confronting others, but above all about recognizing my own worth, my silent achievements, and my ability to resist emotional manipulation. Every step I took that day reminded me that, although the past had been painful, it also prepared me to be resilient and courageous. My relationship with my parents changed, not completely, but enough for me to understand that respect needed to come first from myself. I learned the importance of setting clear boundaries and not allowing unfair criticism and degrading comparisons to define my self-esteem. It was a slow and delicate process, but essential for my inner peace. The feeling of finally standing on my own 2 feet, of no longer relying on anyone's validation to feel complete, became a milestone in my life. I realized that overcoming obstacles is more about inner strength than any external recognition. As for Pedro, the impact of the truth was devastating for him, but it also taught me an important lesson. No one can control the narrative of your life but yourself. His facade crumbled, and I realized that for years, my insecurities were fueled by unrealistic expectations and family manipulation. Today, I see that every humiliation and comparison I suffered, though painful, served to fuel my resilience. Understanding that the truth always reveals itself, and that one's own integrity is non-negotiable, has become one of the pillars of my life. Today, looking back, I see that that moment of courage in marriage wasn't just a confrontation, but the beginning of a profound transformation. I learned that facing fears and exposing truths, even painful ones, is essential for growth and emotional freedom. My previously fragile self-esteem strengthened, and I learned to trust my choices and value my achievements, even if silent. The sense of freedom and self-worth I felt that day continues to guide every important decision I make. In conclusion, I can say that experience completely transformed me. I learned to put myself first, to refuse humiliation, and to fight for my own worth. Life still presents challenges, and some wounds remain open, but now I face them with awareness and strength. I discovered that true overcoming isn't the absence of pain, but the ability to walk with dignity and courage even in the face of it. Today, I share my story so others can see that, even in the face of manipulation, favoritism, and humiliation, it's possible to rise up, become stronger, and achieve your own emotional freedom.